I think anyone who's successful has had a large number of contributions from a lot of different people. And certainly I think about all the people who have helped me and have helped me to be who I am today and helped me get on the journey to who I hope to be tomorrow. There's a long list of people that really have inspired me in so many ways. You know, people in the community who have given me an opportunity when we were immigrants to this country and really needed a helping hand. People who role modeled contributing more of themselves to others than taking for themselves. I would say one of the people that really struck me early on was my father's sponsor when he was a graduate student at Southern Methodist University, pursuing his master's degree in theology. You know, we are Korean Americans, and I was still living in Korea at the time with my mother and my two sisters, while my father was in Dallas, Texas, as a graduate student trying to get his master's degree. And he was living with Reverend Elliott of Dallas, Texas, who was sponsoring him and was letting him really benefit from, you know, working out of his church, an African American church, Hamilton Park United Methodist Church in Dallas, Texas, and sponsoring him in many other ways, living in his home and helping him, I think, with guidance and inspiration. And at some point, I became quite ill. Well, I was still in Korea as a young child, and I got pneumonia. And it was very difficult, as you can imagine, for a graduate student to put themselves through school, even though my father was on a scholarship, and also to contribute enough money to help support his family in Korea. And at some point, my father thought about dropping out of school. You know, this lifelong dream of trying to get an education, a higher degree, this lifelong dream of coming to America, and his ambition was to eventually, you know, become an erudite scholar. And so for him, pursuing this theology degree was, you know, not only a career aspiration, but it was a fulfillment of something that was core to him. So the thought of having to give that up to come back to Korea and to take care of his ailing son was a very difficult decision, but my father's an honorable man, and he came to that tough decision, and he told his sponsor, Reverend Elliott, that this is what he had to do. And Reverend Elliott, if you think about this in the 1970s, you know, I think that there weren't a lot of stories yet written about the interaction between Asian Americans or Korean Americans and the Black community. So I think people were reacting in terms of, you know, I am a person who's in need, and I know you, and I think Reverend Elliott thought to himself, you don't look like me, we don't come from the same background, but you're a young person who's in need, and I want to help you. And so he went to the members of his church, and he said, I have a young graduate student who's living with me, who's having a hard time financially, and if we could help him, then he could continue to pursue his studies, and his family could be well. But if we don't, he's going to have to give up his dream of getting his degree in theology, his master's degree in theology, and this could be life-altering. It wasn't an easy thing, I think, for Reverend Elliott to bring to the members of his middle-class and working-class African-American community. People work hard. They weren't a wealthy community of people who had you know, extra money set aside for philanthropy for people from another part of the world who they didn't know, they didn't have a long life connection with these people. And at first it was hard to really get people convinced that this is something that they had an obligation to give. But Reverend Elliott believed in so much that he challenged his congregation, and he said to them, you know, we read about the lesson of the Good Samaritan, and we talk about, as Christians, our obligation to help others and to give. But when we have this opportunity in our own lives to help someone, a stranger in our midst, can we rise to the challenge of doing that? And he told his congregation that if the congregation couldn't feel that they themselves should also have an obligation as the people in this situation who could help to help, he didn't know if he could lead them as a pastor. He essentially put his own self on the line to help people that didn't look like him, who he didn't have a family obligation to protect, who he didn't owe anything to. It was, again, a stranger in their midst. And this community, this hardworking African-American community in Dallas, Texas, raised enough money to actually fly my mother, my two sisters, and me from Korea to the United States. Without the contributions of this community, who knows how my life would have turned out.